Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to talk about a pen which I feel is one of the most beautiful pens ever designed. This is the Pilot Myu. It came out in 1971. And it's interesting, that seems to be a moment in the history of fountain pens when certain manufacturers were trying to figure out a way to compete with ballpoint pens, just really the collapse of sales of fountain pens. So what should they do, right? Should they stop making fountain pens altogether? And I think there is this decision by a few notable manufacturers to try to come out with a fountain pen that would look absolutely contemporary and be affordable. This is the same time that the Aurora Hastel comes out, and also the Parker 25. This pen is just, to me, just amazingly beautiful. It's entirely made of stainless steel. The nib and the body of the pen are integrated. That is different. At the time, it was an inexpensive pen. It would be the equivalent of less than $35 today. So, I mean, well, I don't know if inexpensive is the right word. It wasn't super expensive, but it was very affordable. And a lot of times people were talk about this pen looking like the famous Concorde supersonic airliner at the time. So there seems to be this move in the early 70s by pen companies to come up with cutting-edge fountain pen designs that I would argue were meant to look contemporary and new, to try to revitalize fountain pens. Now, what are they thinking about? And I think you have to go back to 1950s when Parker introduces the Jotter ballpoint pen, and it's a huge success. So when Parker came out with its first ballpoint pen, the Jotter, in 1954, I think what they were looking at, of course, was the Parker 51. So they made a pen that looked very similar to it. That was sort of its most popular pen. It's one of its most sort of iconic designs, and it continues. When we go back to think of mid-century modern pens, it continues to be sort of I think the dominant pen design of most of the 20th century in terms of its influence. I don't have a Jotter pen, but I just happen to have a generic ballpoint pen that I got a few years ago at a function, and you can see that it's still so much like the Parker 51, although it is a ballpoint pen, right? So I think in the 1970s, at that point in which ballpoint pens like this generic one, are everywhere and sort of are what people kind of almost think a pen that isn't like a stick pen that you can throw out like a big pen, but is a pen with, something like a kind of clip and a cap that you might use at work. This is sort of what becomes in our minds a ballpoint pen, right? And it then became, I think, something that happens in the 60s when they decide to try to compete and bring, fountain pens. People are now no longer using fountain pens in the 50s and 60s. The ballpoint pen is just going crazy. And what does a company like Pilot do in the early 1960s? Well, they come up with a retractable fountain pen. This is a later model, but basically this is what they start making throughout the 60s and 70s until today. And it still kind of looks like a Parker 51, but works like a fountain pen, still works like a fountain pen. And that seemed to be one of the ways that people went. But I think for various reasons in 1970, different pen companies, Parker and Pilot, decide to go in a different direction. Can they come up with a modern fountain pen that will look different? And I think that in 1971, that sort of explains what's going on with the Myu pen that Pilot comes out with. And it also perhaps explains even more strange, radical design like Parker's 25, which again looks different. The idea now being not to make a fountain pen that looks like a ballpoint pen, or which the ballpoint pen originally looked like a fountain pen, but instead to come out with a fountain pen that is radically different, or certainly looks modern and contemporary and doesn't look like any old ballpoint pen. And I think that's what's going on here. Now, at the same time, you don't want to make something that looks so different, so radically different, that people won't even recognize it as a pen. And I think, again, this is really a good compromise between that and the Concord plane, which people always compare this pen to. The first test runs of that plane were in the mid-60s, and the plane actually doesn't really start being used to travel people in on a regular basis until much later. But the design and the experimenting of the plane is going on all through the 1970s. And I think the designers must have had it in mind, I think, when they were coming up with this design. So they wanted it to be as contemporary and as relevant as possible. I think, I do a video on the Parker 25. I think it's very interesting and in some ways a beautiful pen, but I don't think it's anywhere as beautiful as the Pilot Myu pen. Pen, I think, was really meant ideally to be used with a cartridge, but it actually originally it came with a aromatic filler converter. I have a newer one in this one now. So it will use the Con 40 convertible that goes with the Pilot retractable pen, and some other Pilot models, and of course it will use a Pilot cartridge. It's very simple, nice little black top to it on the cap, and it is finished. It really emphasizes the chrome, the stainless steel of the pen. I still have the original sticker on here with the 3,500 yen, which was, as I said, reasonable, affordable for this pen, which I think is so remarkably elegant. It doesn't have a screw on. I mean, the one thing that people sort of say about it is that because this kind of a pocket pen requires that you post it really for it to be a reasonable size, it's not necessarily the best note taker. The other thing about this nib is that it's stainless steel and it is quite it's strong, but as a result, it has absolutely no flex to it. And I think as a writer, it's a bit dry. I also noticed, I just did this, because the pen is like this and there's no section to it, you have to be very careful that you don't touch the bottom of the nib and get ink on your fingers. And I think that is something that I never really occurred to me about a pen like this. It's just you have to be very careful about that, because you have a tendency to sort of not know where the nib begins and where the pen begins, and so the feed is right here. Anyway, that's another thing about the pen that's interesting. That when you streamline everything, certain things are going to change in terms of how the pen is going to work. Nevertheless, I think that just as a pen, it is extremely It is just beautiful. It's very elegant to look at. And then Pilot came out with a follow-up, and this is rarer and more expensive if you're looking to collect these pens, but this is the striped version of the pen, which is also very beautiful. But I actually think that, the classic version is more beautiful. The striped one is more expensive. You're collecting it, it's rarer. It also is very beautiful. Now, in terms, they no longer make this pen, or you can still get, and it's a really popular pen, the Pilot Elite, which has an inlaid nib. And therefore, by the way, if you look at the way the inlaid nib is on this pen, you're much less likely to get ink on your fingers and make that mistake with the way this pen is designed. It's never happened to me. I mean, this is a very beautiful pen also. And the Elite actually predates the Myu pen. It goes back to the early 60s. And actually, it's Sailor that first develops this kind of a pocket pen with an inlaid nib. Their version of the pen starts in 1963, and then the lead and Pilot and Platinum follow with pens that are very similar. I think actually the Pilot versions are nicer than the Sailor and the Platinum versions. So how does it write? So this is the Pilot Myu pen. Myu is the Greek character, and scientists use it to mean mini. So that is where the title of the pen comes. It is supposedly a medium, but this is very fine for medium. But I guess then we would say it's a Japanese medium. This is rhodia paper. This is tacky sumi ink. It's Pilot's ink. Black, obviously ink, rhodia paper. And it is absolutely no flex at all. And a little bit scratchy. I would say this particular pen is not, it's not terrible, but it's not the nicest experience in terms of writing. Some people just love the way these pens write. I mean, maybe this would be better if it was tuned a little bit. I mean, it really is a fine, not a medium, so that's going to make it more scratchy. It's not super wet either. I mean, for me, this is not a pen so much to write with, but to admire, because I just think it looks so great. It's not a pen that I would be using as a daily writer, but a lot of people swear by it. The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and chips and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. Lewis Carroll. So, it certainly writes nicely, particularly if you like to write with a fine pen. If you like to write very small, I think it's also very good. I mean, because it's chrome or stainless steel, metal, it's a bit slippery. That's another thing to keep in mind if you're looking for a pen that's elegant and you want it to be your daily writer. I've also mentioned that if you aren't careful, you can touch the feed and that gets ink all over your fingers. That's not the case of the Elite, later Elite 95 pen from Pilot. I think that's a much better choice as an everyday pen that is inspired by this pen. But as I say, this is, I think, one of the most beautiful pens ever made.